My new wife told me, in front of my entire family, that her daughter isn't my daughter, and that I had no right to correct her, and I smiled, said nothing, and went to bed that night already knowing exactly what I was going to do the next morning, and it had nothing to do with yelling and everything to do with a stack of paperwork sitting in my home office that neither of them knew existed yet. Let me give you the full picture, because this story only makes sense once you understand what I'd actually been doing for the 2 years leading up to that dinner. I'll call my wife Colette for this story. We got married about 18 months before the night everything came apart, both of us coming into the marriage as divorced parents trying to build something new in our 40s. I had 2 adult sons from my first marriage, both grown and out of the house by then, and Colette had 1 daughter, I'll call her Priya, who was 20 years old at the time, in her 2nd year of university. When Colette and I first got together, I made a decision that, looking back, probably set the whole tone for everything that came after. I decided I wanted to genuinely step into a supportive role for Priya, not as a replacement for her biological father, who'd been mostly absent since she was a kid, but as someone who showed up consistently, someone she could rely on. When Colette's ex-husband stopped contributing to Priya's education costs about a year before I met them, I quietly picked up where he left off. Tuition, a used car so she could get to her off-campus job and back safely, a phone plan, some of her living expenses when her part-time job hours got cut during exam season. I never made a big deal out of any of it. I did it because I genuinely cared about her, and because I believed, maybe naively, that showing up consistently would eventually mean something. For the first year, things were actually good between us. Priya called me by my first name, which was fine. I never expected Dad or anything like that, but she was warm, appreciative, texted me thank you messages after I'd cover something for her, seemed to genuinely enjoy having me around. I let myself believe we were building something real, a family, even if it looked a little different than the traditional version. Things started shifting about 8 months before that dinner, slowly at first, in ways I mostly excused. Priya started making little comments here and there, nothing huge on their own, but the kind of thing that accumulates. Jokes about how I wasn't really family. Eye rolls when I'd ask simple questions about her school schedule. A comment once, at a family lunch, about how she already had a dad and didn't need a second opinion on her life choices, said with a laugh, but landing with an edge underneath it that made the table go quiet for a second. I brought it up with Colette a few times, gently, not looking to start conflict, just trying to understand what was going on. Each time, Colette would wave it off. She's just adjusting. She doesn't mean it that way. You're being too sensitive. I want to be honest with you, hearing that repeatedly from my own wife started wearing on me in a way I didn't fully admit to myself until much later. The night that changed everything was a dinner I hosted for my side of the family, my 2 sons, my sister and her husband, and my elderly mother, who'd driven 2 hours to be there. It was meant to be a simple, warm evening, nothing complicated, just introducing Colette and Priya more fully into my family after over a year together. Dinner was going fine, honestly, right up until dessert, when my mother, in her gentle, old-fashioned way, made a comment to Priya about her plate manners, something small and harmless, the kind of thing grandmothers say without any real weight behind it. Priya's reaction was immediate and sharp. She said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, that she didn't appreciate being parented by people who weren't actually her family, and gestured, pointedly, in my direction when she said it, making it clear the comment wasn't really about my mother at all. The table went silent in that specific, uncomfortable way tables go silent when everyone suddenly remembers their guests in someone else's carefully built piece. I felt my face get hot, not with anger exactly, more with a kind of quiet humiliation, sitting there in my own home, in front of my own mother and sons, having just been publicly dismissed by the 20-year-old I'd spent the last year and a half financially and emotionally supporting like she was my own. I said something simple, calm, trying to de-escalate rather than inflame anything. I said that I thought we were all family here, and that I hoped we could talk to each other with a little more respect, especially with my mother at the table. That's when Colette, my own wife, sitting right beside me, said the sentence I don't think I'll ever fully forget. She looked at me, in front of everyone, and said, "She's not your daughter. Don't correct her." I want you to imagine that moment, because I've replayed it more times than I can count. Not just the words, but the tone, flat, almost automatic, like she'd been holding that sentence ready for a while, just waiting for an excuse to say it out loud. In front of my mother. In front of my sons. In front of my sister and her husband. My own wife, essentially announcing to my entire family that my role in her daughter's life came with an asterisk, that whatever I'd built with Priya over 18 months meant nothing the moment it became inconvenient for her to defend it. I smiled. I actually smiled, and I want to explain why, because it wasn't some kind of forced politeness. It was because, in that exact moment, something in me went completely still and completely clear, the way water gets clear right before it freezes. I understood, with total certainty, exactly what I was going to do, and I felt strangely calm about it. The rest of the dinner was awkward but survivable. My family left a little earlier than planned, my mother hugging me a bit longer than usual on her way out, the kind of hug that says, "I saw that, and I'm sorry," without any words attached to it. Colette and Priya went to bed like nothing unusual had happened. I sat up for another hour in my home office, not doing anything dramatic, just going through paperwork I already had organized, because as it turns out, I'd actually been more careful about all of this than either of them realized. Here's something I should explain now, because it matters for the rest of the story. Everything I'd been paying for, Priya's tuition, her car, her phone plan, none of it had ever been set up as some kind of unconditional, automatic family fund. I'd structured every single one of those things deliberately, in my own name, on accounts and agreements I controlled directly, not because I expected this exact scenario, but honestly, because after my first divorce, I'd learned the hard way that generosity without structure tends to get taken for granted, or worse, weaponized later. Colette knew, in a general sense, that I was covering those costs. What she didn't fully understand, because I'd never spelled it out, was just how much control I still had over all of it. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls before either of them woke up. The first was to the university's financial office, where I'd set up a direct payment plan for Priya's tuition under my own account, since her mother's credit situation post-divorce hadn't qualified for the plan the school required. I didn't cancel anything maliciously or dramatically, I simply informed them that, effective immediately, I would no longer be the responsible party on that account, and that future payments would need to be arranged directly with Priya or her mother. The second call was to my insurance agent, removing Priya's car, which was registered and financed entirely under my name, from my policy, and initiating the paperwork to have the vehicle either bought out by her at fair value or returned, since legally, it had always been mine, just used by her. The third call was to my phone provider, removing her line from my family plan. I want to be clear about something, because if stories like this interest you, and honestly, if you've ever found yourself giving generously to people who eventually made you feel small for it, you're going to want to hear how the rest of this played out, so go ahead and subscribe if this is the kind of story you enjoy, because there's a lot more of them coming. None of this was about punishing Priya out of spite, and I want to be honest about that even now, looking back. It was about something a lot simpler and, in a strange way, a lot more important to me. I needed to understand what my actual role in that family was. If I wasn't her family, as my own wife had announced in front of my mother, then it seemed fair, reasonable even, that the significant financial support I'd been quietly providing as a family member should probably follow that same logic. The fallout started around noon that day, when Priya tried to use her student portal and found the tuition payment plan had been removed. Then her car insurance notification came through. Then her phone, mid-conversation with a friend, apparently, just stopped working. Colette called me at work, furious, asking what I'd done and why. I explained calmly, the same tone I'd use in any business conversation, that I'd simply removed myself as the financial party on things that had always technically been mine to control, and that since I wasn't Priya's family, as she'd clarified so clearly the night before, it didn't seem appropriate for me to continue functioning as one financially either. There was a long silence on the phone. I could practically hear her recalculating everything in real time, the comments she'd made without thinking twice about it suddenly landing with actual, tangible weight. I came home that evening to a very different atmosphere than the one I'd left that morning. Priya was in tears at the kitchen table, genuinely distressed, not performing it, actually panicked about how she was going to cover tuition for the semester, how she was going to get to her job without a car, whether she'd have to drop out entirely for a term while things got sorted. I sat down across from her, and for the first time in 8 months, I actually said out loud everything I'd been swallowing. I told her that I'd never asked her to call me Dad, never expected some instant bond just because I married her mother. All I'd ever asked for was basic respect, the same respect I'd shown her consistently for 18 months. I told her that being financially generous and being treated like a stranger in your own home don't really coexist for very long, no matter how patient a person tries to be. She cried harder, said she was sorry, said she hadn't really thought about how her comments over the past several months had actually landed, that she'd sort of absorbed some resentment from her father's situation and, without fully realizing it, had been taking some of that out on me because I was safe, present, easy to push against in a way her actual father never was, since he simply wasn't around enough to push against at all. I appreciated the honesty, genuinely. But I also told her, gently, that understanding where resentment comes from doesn't automatically undo the effect it has on the person receiving it. Colette and I had a much longer, much harder conversation that same night, after Priya had gone to her room. I told my wife, as calmly as I could manage, that the sentence she'd said at that dinner table wasn't just careless, it was, in a lot of ways, the truest reflection of how she actually saw my role in that family, dressed up, for 18 months, in warmth and gratitude, but revealed instantly the moment she felt she had to choose a side in front of an audience. She didn't have a great response to that, because honestly, there wasn't one. She apologized, repeatedly, said she'd spoken without thinking, said she never meant to diminish what I'd done for Priya. I believe that she regretted it. I wasn't sure yet whether regret and genuine change were the same thing. Here's the twist in this story, the part that actually surprised me, because I want to be honest, I expected things to either fully fall apart or slowly go back to exactly how they were before, with everyone just quietly pretending that dinner never happened. Neither of those things is exactly what occurred. About 2 weeks later, Priya came to me, on her own, without Colette prompting her, and asked if we could talk. She'd gotten a part-time job increase and had done the math on covering her own phone plan and contributing toward her car payments going forward, if I was willing to keep the vehicle registered under a joint arrangement instead of fully separating it. As for tuition, she'd applied for an emergency student loan to cover the current semester, but she asked, directly, honestly, if I'd be willing to sit down with her and actually talk about what continuing support might look like going forward, not as something automatic and unspoken, but as something we both agreed to, with actual mutual respect attached to it this time. I want to tell you that moment felt like some enormous emotional breakthrough, but honestly, it felt smaller than that, and more real because of it. It felt like two people, finally, actually negotiating a relationship instead of just assuming one existed based on money moving quietly in the background. We did eventually rebuild something, Priya and me, slower and more deliberately than before. I resumed some of the financial support, but structured differently this time, tied to actual conversations, actual acknowledgement, rather than silent generosity that apparently could get erased with one careless sentence at a dinner table. Colette and I went through a rough few months after that dinner too, more honest conversations than we'd had in the entire marriage up to that point, about roles, about respect, about what it actually means to blend a family instead of just assuming it happens automatically because two adults love each other. I think about that dinner often, especially the exact second Colette said, "She's not your daughter, don't correct her," because it's strange how one sentence, 6 words really, can end up clarifying an entire relationship dynamic that 18 months of quiet generosity had somehow left completely undefined. I don't think Colette meant to reveal as much as she did in that moment. I think she was just protecting her daughter reflexively, the way parents do, without fully considering what that reflex actually communicated about where I stood. What I learned from all of it, and what I'd want anyone in a similar blended family situation to understand, is that generosity without clarity eventually becomes a liability, not because the people receiving it are bad people, but because unspoken expectations have a way of curdling into resentment on both sides if nobody ever actually names them out loud. I gave freely for 18 months because I wanted to, because I believed I was building something. But I never once said clearly, "This is conditional on basic mutual respect," because I assumed that went without saying. It turns out, almost nothing goes without saying in a new family, no matter how much you might want it to. These days, things are different, not perfect, blended families rarely are, but different in the way that actually matters. Priya calls me by my first name still, and honestly, I've made peace with that being enough. What changed isn't the label she uses for me. What changed is that respect stopped being something I hoped for quietly in the background, and became something we all actually talk about, out loud, at that same kitchen table where everything nearly fell apart.